Good day, campers. Today's project is I'm going to install a remote fuse for the onboard water pump in my fifth wheel. The manufacturer installed this inline fuse between the two separate switches that control this pump, one inside on a tablet and one outside in the wet bay. So if for some reason this pump was to blow the fuse, I actually have to empty out my pass-through storage, move this wall to get to the pump and the inline fuse. So I'm going to remove this inline fuse and connect it to a fuse mounted next to the pump switch in my wet bay. First step will be to remove this crimp connector to remove this end of the inline fuse. So this crimp connector connects two wires, one from the switch inside the RV and one from the switch in the wet bay to the fuse, which ultimately goes to the pump. I'm not a big fan of these crimp type connectors, so I'm going to replace it with a solder connector. After I remove the crimp connector, I've seen a lot of oxidation inside where that crimp connector was. So I'm going to cut these wires and re-strip them so that I have fresh wire inside my solder connector. This blue wire comes from what will be one side of my fuse. These two green wires come from the two separate switches. I will place all three of those inside this solder connector. Apply a little heat from my heat gun, and we'll have a nice, solid, watertight, reliable connection. All right, so now I've done my solder connector for the two switches and a wire going to the fuse. Doesn't matter which side of the fuse. Now the wire going to the pump, they soldered to one side of the fuse. I'm going to cut just past that solder connection. Sorry about slapping the camera around. I have connected one side of my fuse to my two switches, one in the control panel, one up here in the wet bay. I have connected the other side of my fuse directly to the pump. These two blue wires go up to the wet bay through the plastic. On the other side will be the fuse. That will be the next step, is to install the fuse, lug connectors on the end of the wire, and we will be done. This is the solder connector for the two switches that go to one side of the fuse. Then we come from the other side of the fuse down to the pump, and this wire goes directly to the pump. Up top at the fuse, doesn't make any difference which side is which. We're just going right straight through it. I've cleaned up the wires a little bit. Like I said, the next step is we'll put some lug connectors on the end of the wire, connect it to the fuse, and then we'll have a remote fuse. These are the solder connectors that I used. There will be a link to them in the description, along with the fuse holder that I use. So here we are on the outside. This is where I mounted my fuse holder. I wanted the fuse holder here next to the pump switch, so I was not able to use the mounting tabs. So I have super glued the fuse holder to the plastic for the Nautilus panel where I routed the wires through. I've put a little silicone on there. Although it's plastic, this will eliminate any risk of chafing and damaging the wires. Hopefully this helps you with putting in a remote fuse for your water pump. As always, thanks for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe.